A Judicial Services Commission tribunal looking into Western Cape Judge President John Hlophe's alleged misconduct has been postponed. The sitting was expected to have finally taken place somewhere in Johannesburg from today and follows years of postponements, to be exact 12 years, as this report by colleague Livhuhani Manyatshe reports.
Western Cape Judge President John Hlophe striding along with the then Provincial Premier, with the confidence that has seen him take on his colleagues in the judiciary over mistreatment, perceived or otherwise. A judicial tribunal, a body set up to determine the fitness of judges to remain on the bench in the face of misconduct, was expected to sit in the hope to resolve a long-standing dispute over the conduct of Judge Hlophe. The tribunal has been marred with delays, indefinite postponements and litigations since the initial complaint was lodged with the Judicial Services Commission in May 2008.
Everybody agrees this is a matter that should finally be resolved. This is a matter that has been dragging on for far too long.
Within 4 years of Hlophe's appointment as head of the Western Cape Division, he began courting controversy. In 2004, he submitted a formal report to the Chief Justice and Justice Minister, accusing senior members of the Western Cape Judiciary of undermining him because of the color of his skin. His missteps would go on to upset the apple cart, with most of the complaints against him ending up at the JSC. A grievance from his deputy, Judge Patricia Goliath, warranted a tribunal, which will be heard on a date yet to be determined. The current tribunal emanates from a complaint alleging that Hlophe tried to influence two Constitutional Court judges regarding a matter that was before the Apex Court. It is claimed that Judge President Hlophe had visited Justices Chris Jafta and Jess Gabinde in their chambers on two separate occasions. In an unprecedented move, all the judges of the Constitutional Court, including then Chief Justice Pius Langa and his deputy, Dikgang Moseneke, laid a complaint against Hlophe. For the first time, a full bench complaining against a fellow judge. The judge president has always maintained his innocence in the face of all allegations leveled against him.
JSC has decided to appoint a subcommittee consisting of Judge President Mwepe, Ishmael Siminya SC, and I, to further investigate this matter by, amongst other things, interviewing J.P. Hlophe and judges of the Constitutional Court. Whether the evidence will be sufficient to lead to a formal inquiry, to a formal hearing, that's the purpose of the investigation. We would like to have it disposed of before the 5th of September in the interest of all the judges concerned, and also in the interest of the judiciary as well.
Hlophe halted the JSC probe by going to court, where he successfully argued, amongst other issues, that the Constitutional Court judges had prejudiced him by releasing a media statement with the allegations without affording him the right of reply. The opposition party, the Democratic Alliance, and legal governance advocacy group Freedom Under Law would go to court to challenge the decision, forcing the JSC to reopen the investigation. Concerns over tribunal guidelines came to a head in 2017 when another judge, Nkwana Motata, also challenged them, ending in a standstill of all ongoing judicial tribunals. 11 years later, in 2018, the Constitutional Court would dismiss Motata's appeal, paving a way for judges to answer for their misconduct.
This particular case took a long time and produced a record of more than 1 hour.
With the tribunal now scheduled for December 2020, and given the long and elusive road to securing a hearing, the question is, will Western Cape Judge President John Hlophe ever face the music? Livhuhani Manyatshe for SABC News in Johannesburg.
To help us unpack some of these issues related to the Judicial Services Commission looking into Western Cape Judge President John Hlophe's alleged misconduct, we've got legal journalist Karyn Maughan joining us via, I don't know, Skype or Zoom, not sure, but it's good to see you whichever way.
Thanks for having me.
Will he ever face the music? That's the big question. That's how the insert ended. That's the question everybody's asking. What do you think?
Well, I think it's pivotal for the integrity of the judiciary, which Leanne plays such a massively important part in our country. I mean, the judiciary has been responsible for making some of the most seminal, politically groundbreaking, socially groundbreaking rulings in South Africa, particularly in our democracy. They are a bastion of accountability for everyone else. So they need to be maintain that accountability within their own ranks. As that insert correctly points out, this entire process has been preceded by a number of different, matters of litigation that have dragged on for several years. The Judicial Services Commission itself has faced scathing criticism in terms of the way it handled this matter, particularly its preliminary decision that John Hlophe should not face a potential impeachment tribunal in relation to these allegations that he sought to influence two constitutional court judges to rule in favor of Jacob Zuma in a matter that is now coming to fruition with the corruption trial of Jacob Zuma. Because, of course, that particular ruling was in relation to the 93,000 documents that had been seized by the Scorpions and the legal validity of the warrants that were used to obtain those documents.
Yeah, I mean, you've covered this over the years, and I think I said, correct me if I'm wrong, I mean, the amount of years that this has been going on, it's 12 years, am I correct in saying that?
That's 100% correct, Leanne, and this is what's so fascinating. If one looks at this matter, and for instance, the corruption trial of Jacob Zuma, both of these matters have been dragging on in parallel. Both have sort of stopped short in whether by the NPA or the JSC, both subject to litigation that forced them to effectively be reopened or the prosecution of Jacob Zuma re-implemented. And now we sit in a scenario where all these years later, the former president is facing potential trial, and John Hlophe is finally facing the prospect of an impeachment tribunal.
Yeah.
We don't know at this point if he is going to utilize his further legal options to challenge this. But one of the things that is quite disturbing is that the entire process of all this litigation has been funded in its entirety by ordinary taxpayers, with no sense of when this thing is actually going to be resolved.
I mean, what do you think has been behind all of these delays every single time, and including this one now? I mean, would this happen to a normal citizen, or is it honestly because he is a judge?
Well, the thing is, Leanne, ordinary people wouldn't have access to tax money to fund their litigation. And we know from speaking to the Justice Department that, the judge president has been provided with untrammeled funding of his legal costs in this particular matter, with no guarantee that he has to repay if he is indeed impeached. So we have, what has been called the Stalingrad strategy of litigation in a number of different matters. And I think a number of critics would turn around and say that this, in fact, embodies that exact style of litigation. I think the judge president would turn around and say, well, I have been the victim of an egregious process. He has again and again, as the reporter correctly pointed out, claimed that he is a victim of a sort of racially motivated agenda because he is pro-transformation within the judiciary, that this is simply unfair. But the counter to that, of course, is that if it is indeed so that is the case, then face the tribunal, put your case on the table, and if there are these nefarious motivations to it, they will emerge. But in the interest of, the democracy itself, ordinary citizens need to see that judges will be held accountable if these kind of allegations are made against them.
And that's, I mean, when we look at another case, and it's exactly the same. I mean, one will remember, and we saw this in the insert as well, the matter related to Judge Karyn Maughan, who was alleged to have driven into a residential wall in a Johannesburg suburb while under the influence of alcohol. I mean, this was only settled last year. That's another case of something dragging on.
Correct. We've seen that the JSC can move far more quickly than it does. For instance, in the matter of Mabel Jansen, who was accused of those very heinous comments on Facebook with regard to sexual violence and quite racist overtones in her post. We have seen them. She, of course, resigned. Maughan, of course, not being impeached, being found to have been, guilty of racism and improper conduct, but not impeached. Now we have a scenario where, the judge president is facing a second potential impeachment inquiry. Of course, the JSC will need to make a decision whether it acts on the Chief Justice Mogoeng's recommendations that indeed John Hlophe should face impeachment, possibly over abusive language, abuse of power, and the alleged assault of a fellow judge. That same judge began also facing an impeachment inquiry for allegedly, potentially lying over what happened during that assault, and the potential allegations of him being involved in trust fund, irregularities, so trust account irregularities. So this entire matter is sort of imploding within the Judicial Service Commission at the moment. The Western Cape High Court, as we've seen again and again, is a dysfunctional court. There can be no doubt about that. Half of the judges have laid a complaint against Judge Mushtaq Parker, the judge that Hlophe is accused of assaulting, over his apparent dishonesty in terms of what exactly happened there. And it cannot continue. This needs to be resolved. And not just for the functioning of that court, but for the reputation of the judiciary itself.
Yeah, and that is an important point, because that's exactly what's at stake here, is the reputation of the judiciary. And we keep on seeing these postponements, which begs to be something that has got to be questionable. But you have brought up all of the instances and all of the allegations against Judge Hlophe. Is it heard under one case, one trial, or are these all separate issues that need to be dealt with?
Well, essentially, Leanne, there's two matters. This 2008 matter was due to be, heard today and for the next week or so. That has been postponed to December. In that instance, the JSC is pursuing an impeachment tribunal. So Judge John Hlophe can be impeached. If he is impeached as a result of these allegations, he loses his benefits. It's an immensely serious thing. In the other matter where Patricia Goliath made those series of allegations, the JCC initially said, no, they don't believe that this warrants a judicial conduct tribunal, and they referred it for an investigation. The Chief Justice then looked at the allegations and said, no, I do believe that these allegations are so serious that they should warrant an impeachment investigation. We then saw Judge John Hlophe's lawyer come out and say that he would appeal that because on one of the many bases, he believed that the Chief Justice was Islamophobic and had made certain of those decisions against him because of these anti-Islamic prejudices that he had. And it brought, of course, in that whole matter where the Chief Justice has been criticized over his comments with regard to Israel. So, this case just blooms controversy over and over and over again. So in terms of that matter, Hlophe also lodged an appeal against Mogoeng's dismissal of his complaint of racism and a number of other things and gross misconduct against Patricia Goliath. Mogoeng saying that he did not believe there was any real basis for that and that there wasn't enough evidence to substantiate those allegations. The decision around that appeal is still pending. We may see some resolution of it in the JSC, in the next few days or weeks. But yes, that matter is very much still a potential impeachment inquiry that Judge John Hlophe may face. It just, will obviously, we'll have to see what happens with this Goliath appeal. And of course, given the kind of language that he's employed, given this very stern attack on Mogoeng and his alleged Islamophobic prejudice and bias, etc., Leanne, I think it's very much within the bounds of possibility that John Hlophe will try and take that decision on review if he is indeed found to have to face an impeachment inquiry with regard to those allegations.
Wow. So we could even see this dragging on even longer. Now, one of the interesting things in this is also who Judge Hlophe is actually being represented by. Advocate Courtney Griffiths, QC, the man who represented Liberian dictator Charles Taylor at the International Criminal Court. And the reason given for today's postponement up to December is because he's not available. Now, this is also questionable and something that we need to have to look into. Talk to us about that and your understanding here.
Well, can you imagine if an ordinary human being came and said to a court, well, I'm not available to go on trial for my potential criminal charges because my advocate's not available today? There's, it's exactly what you're raising. It's that thing of rules applying in different ways to different people. We also understand from the JSC that that one of the witnesses involved in this matter, in fact, is unwell, and that may have also been a definitive factor. So it's not just about the availability of Courtney Griffiths, but the fact that the JP has employed a counsel from overseas, funded by South African taxpayers, is an indication, I think, of the seriousness with which he regards the case against him at this point. But again, it's about this issue of, do you respect the seriousness of the process that you are facing? Do you believe that you need to do everything in your power to make sure that this process proceeds in an open, clear, transparent, and efficient manner? And are you invested in it? And I think that kind of conduct would raise questions about the Judge President's commitment to clearing his name in this context. That being said, he has continuously said that he does not believe that there is any valid basis for him to face this kind of tribunal. And I think when this matter does eventually result in a hearing, it's going to be an exercise in really him making that case again and again.
I want to ask you, when you were saying that obviously there's one of the ill health was Judge Chris Jafta, which is also something that's come into consideration here. But I just want to ask you a general question. Is it fair to suggest that the drafters of our democratic rulebook didn't foresee errant judges? From what we're hearing, the rules, the payments, everything that's going on here. How could this be the case? Why not?
I think the thing is that when we came into democracy with a huge sense of optimism. And, we also gave huge powers to the president, because we had, at the time, Nelson Mandela was the president. There was the sense of benevolent executive authority, a benevolent judiciary, a benevolent justice system. And I think that, you always need to frame your legislation in terms of worst case scenarios, that there is effective accountability. And I think, a number of organizations, including, for example, the Council for the Advancement of the South African Constitution, have made the point again and again that really we need to have an exercise of judicial accountability that is far more clear and efficient than the one that we have at the moment. For instance, if you're going to face impeachment, you need to go through a preliminary process to, evaluate whether the matters that you're accused of, would justify an impeachment tribunal. Then the JSC must make, if you don't decide that that's the case, it then goes to a separate investigation. At that point, they can say you should face a tribunal, or the JSC must then make a recommendation or say, yes, the tribunal must go ahead. So there's a number of different steps in this process that make it quite cumbersome and difficult to result in a resolution. We see a similar kind of scenario playing out with Parliament trying to develop rules for the potential impeachment of the head of a Chapter 9 institution. At this point, there are 17 steps in that process, which Public Protector Busisiwe Mkhwebane is now questioning in a court of law. So, we have all these institutions which are so pivotal, watchdogs, the courts, accountability, but they are not necessarily, able to themselves be held to account in a way that is efficient, transparent, and inspires public faith that indeed the rules apply to all of us, including those who have to exercise that oversight over all of us.
Karyn Maughan, always a pleasure speaking to you, legal journalist Karyn Maughan, talking to us about the postponed tribunal of Judge Hlophe, and this is moving now, apparently until the 7th to the 11th of December. It was meant to start today, and that was, of course, the Western Cape Judge President John Hlophe's alleged misconduct. We'll see if that does go ahead. We have to say goodbye to our